Hello everyone, welcome to the Scientific Fiction Stories, where science meets the magic of storytelling. No boring lectures, no scary formula, just the fun, a little wonder, and magic of those wow moments. And yes, everything here is in real human voices, no robotic or AI voices, just heart to heart talk. So, come on, let's start a new chapter of science, but this time truly from the heart. And please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates.
There's a sound a galaxy makes when it is afraid. It is not a scream. Civilizations that have survived long enough to cross the stars learn quickly that screaming wastes air, wastes time, and, most importantly, wastes the few seconds you might have to actually do something. No, the sound the galaxy makes when it is afraid is quieter than that. It is the sound of 1,000 different species going very, very still. Sensors powering down to passive. Engines throttled to minimum burn. Subspace channels switching from open broadcast to encrypted whispers. Is the sound of everyone holding their breath at the same time. The Galactic Cooperative had held that breath for 11 days when the drifting ship appeared on the edge of the Varith corridor. It was not the ship that scared them. Ships appeared all the time. Lost, broken, abandoned, occasionally crewed by something that used to be alive and wasn't anymore in any way that mattered. The cooperative had protocols for all of those. Thick binders full of protocols. Species had argued for decades about the correct order of operations in each scenario, and those arguments had eventually become the protocols, and the protocols had become law, and the law had eventually become the thing that kept everyone from dying on a Tuesday because someone forgot which form to file. No, it was not the ship. It was what was happening to time around it. The readings came in from 17 different monitoring stations simultaneously, and for approximately 4 minutes, every analyst on duty at every station assumed their equipment was broken. Because the readings said that the vessel, a mid-class human freighter, designation Callaway's Luck, out of the Terran port of New Cascadia, was sitting inside a bubble where time had stopped. Not slowed. Not distorted in the minor ways that gravitational bodies produced as a natural background hum of space-time. Stopped. The light leaving the ship's hull was 11 days old and aging no further. The vessel's running lights were frozen mid-flicker. A coffee mug. This detail would later appear in 43 separate incident reports because no one could believe it, was visible through the forward viewport, caught in the act of tipping off a console edge, hanging there perfectly still at a 47-degree angle, going nowhere. The mug had been falling for 11 days. The cooperative convened an emergency session in 3 hours. That was, by their standards, instantaneous. Civilizations that operated on bureaucratic timescales measured in decades did not move in 3 hours for anything short of the end of everything. Several senior delegates showed up in their sleep equivalents. The hegemony of wrath sent a representative who was still chewing something. Nobody commented on it. 49 species sat in the chamber and stared at the tactical display showing Callaway's Luck hanging in the dark, its running lights mid-blink, its mug mid-fall, and collectively across 49 different evolutionary histories and 49 different philosophical frameworks for understanding the universe. They panicked. Quietly. Professionally. In a way that looked a great deal like calm deliberation if you were watching from outside. But it was panic, the kind that wears a tie and takes notes and proposes 17 competing theories in the same breath. Temporal weaponization, accidental activation of a theoretical drive humanity wasn't supposed to have yet. A warning from something older than the cooperative. A test, a trap, a glitch in reality itself. The one thing not a single delegate proposed, not once in 11 days of emergency sessions, was the truth. The truth was considerably more human than any of them were prepared for. And it was going to walk into that chamber in 72 hours wearing cargo pants, carrying a thermos of coffee that was still hot and this detail would also appear in 43 incident reports for different reasons. He had been running a little behind schedule and hadn't actually been on the ship when it happened. His name was Decker Hale. He was going to find the whole thing very funny. The galaxy was not going to understand why. Not yet. The first monitoring station to pick up the anomaly was Relay Buoy Theta 9, a small automated sensor package floating at the edge of the Varith corridor, placed there 40 years ago by a cooperative science delegation that had since been dissolved due to budget disagreements, and maintained since then by nobody in particular. Theta 9 was the galaxy's equivalent of a smoke detector in an abandoned house. It ran its routines, it sent its data, and it expected, based on 40 years of precedent, that nothing would come of it. On the 11th day of the third month of the cooperative's 1,847th administrative cycle, Theta 9 sent a signal that broke every routine it had ever run. The signal reached the cooperative's main relay hub at 0317 station time, when the overnight staff consisted of 3 analysts, a maintenance drone that was currently stuck in a loop trying to replace a ceiling panel, and a pot of something that the Keth analyst, Sorenvel, had brewed from her homeworld rations and which smelled to her 2 colleagues like a very confident fungus. Analyst Sorenvel received the signal first because she was the only one not currently arguing with the maintenance drone. She read it. She read it again. She pulled up the raw sensor data behind it and read that. Then she set her cup of very confident fungus tea down very carefully on her console and said in a voice she was working hard to keep level, "Marin. OSK, I need you to look at something." Marin was a Talashi, gray-skinned and long-fingered, built for the low-gravity environment of her home world, and thus occupying her chair with the boneless ease of someone who had never needed to worry about their skeleton. OSK was a hegemony-born Vrathi, compact and dense-muscled, and currently losing an argument with a ceiling panel. Both of them looked at Sorenvel's screen. Both of them went through approximately the same sequence she had. Read, reread, pull raw data, read raw data, sit very still. The equipment, Marin said finally. I checked 3 times. Cross-reference with 14 other buoys, all returning the same. Sorenvel pulled up the 14 secondary readings. They were identical in their wrongness, each one confirming from a different angle what Theta 9 had seen first. A vessel in the Varith corridor, dead in space, encased in a localized zone of temporal suspension. The Callaway's Luck. Registered human freighter. Mid-class cargo hauler, crew of 1. Listed as Decker Hale, Terra National, independent contractor. Last port of call, New Cascadia Station. 1 crew member, OSK, said. He had finally turned away from the ceiling panel. 1. All 3 of them looked at the display showing the ship. The running lights, mid-blink. The viewport, the mug. Is that a beverage container? Marin asked. A cup, yes. Appears to be in the process of falling. For how long? Sorenvel checked the timestamp on the earliest reading. 11 days, 4 hours, and approximately 17 minutes. The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. We should call someone, OSK said. Yes, said Sorenvel. Neither of them moved for another 40 seconds because calling someone meant admitting this was real, and admitting this was real meant a cascade of consequences none of them were equipped to navigate at 0317 station time with only a pot of fungus tea between them. Then Sorenvel picked up her comm unit and called Director Onsell, who was the senior duty officer for the next 6 hours and who had, when last observed, been asleep. Director Onsell picked up on the second signal. She listened. She asked 2 questions. She told them to hold the line. 3 minutes later, she came back on and said the emergency session had been called and that all 3 of them should document everything they had seen and touched and done since receiving the signal, and that they should not speak to anyone outside the chain of command, and that they had done well. Sorenvel looked at Marin. Marin looked at OSK. OSK looked at the ceiling panel, which had just successfully been replaced by the maintenance drone, which had not been paying attention to any of this, and which was already moving on to its next task. Well, OSK said. Well, Sorenvel agreed. They documented. The emergency session convened in the Grand Deliberation Chamber of Cooperative Station Meridian 7, a room designed to hold 72 species simultaneously in atmospheric comfort, which meant it was partitioned into breathable zones and temperature gradients and light spectra that suited everyone adequately and no one perfectly. The Keth delegates were slightly too warm. The Vrathi delegates were slightly too cold. The Sen contingent had to wear their moisture collars, which they found undignified, and had filed a formal complaint about the chamber's humidity settings every session for 60 years. The complaint was still being reviewed. Into this room, on the morning of the 12th day since Calloway's luck had been found, filed 49 delegations, 12 scientific advisory panels, 3 independent observers whose status was technically disputed, but who had been showing up for so long no one had the energy to eject them anymore, and 1 very small robot that belonged to no one and that had been attending sessions for 20 years without anyone successfully identifying its origin. Delegate Principal Sorvith of the Keth opened proceedings. She was a tall, thin being with 4 arms and the kind of patience that came from belonging to a species that had survived 3 extinction-level events by sitting very still and waiting. She was considered one of the finest diplomats in the cooperative, which was the kind of title that sounded impressive until you understood how exhausting it actually was. "We are here," she said, which was both an opening statement and, given the circumstances, a mild expression of relief. The tactical display behind her showed Calloway's luck. The mug, the lights, the readings. For the next 6 hours, the 49 species of the Galactic Cooperative examined what they knew about the situation and collectively produced the following theories. Each argued with the deep conviction that came from people who were very intelligent and very frightened and very certain that being the one to correctly identify the problem would mean something significant for their career. Theory 1, advanced by the Vrathi Hegemony Scientific Delegation, was that Calloway's luck had somehow intersected with a naturally occurring pocket of temporal inversion, a phenomenon that was entirely theoretical and had never been observed but whose mathematics the Vrathi delegation was confident absolutely allowed for this. The Vrathi had a particular fondness for phenomena whose mathematics allowed for things because it gave them something to model, and they were excellent at modeling. Theory 2, advanced by the Sen Collective's 3 delegates, who always voted as one and spoke in a rotating sequence that newcomers found disorienting, was that the human vessel had activated a temporal suspension drive. The cooperative's records on human technological development suggested this was several decades beyond Terran capability. The Sen delegates noted that cooperative records on human technological development had been wrong before, a statement that produced a noticeable chill in the room because everyone knew what they were referring to and nobody wanted to talk about the breach event again. Theory 3, from small but vocal faction of the ecological mediation bloc, was that the ship had disturbed something that lived in the Varith corridor that nobody had known was there. This theory was received with a particular kind of polite silence that meant everyone thought it was ridiculous, but nobody wanted to be the one to say so, because 3 times in cooperative history, someone had proposed something similarly ridiculous and been right. Theory 4, and this was the one that made the chamber genuinely go quiet, came from Delegate Advisor Pell of the Interstitial Sciences Board, a being who had the approximate appearance of a large brain in a small jar mounted on a mobility platform, and who was not technically a delegate but who had been granted speaking rights so long ago that the original authorization was stored on a data medium that no working reader could access anymore. Delegate Advisor Pell proposed that the temporal bubble was not accidental, that it was a demonstration, that someone, something, had placed the human ship inside it deliberately, and that the question of who or what, and more importantly why, was the only question that actually mattered. The chamber was quiet for a long time after that. "If it is a demonstration," said Delegate Principal Sorvith carefully, "then it is directed at someone." "Yes," said Pell. "At us. At the cooperative. Possibly. Or at the humans specifically. Or at both. What would be the message?" Pell's jar rotated slightly, which was its version of a shrug. "That whoever did this can stop time. That they chose to demonstrate it on a human vessel. that they were watching to see how we would respond. The chamber sat with that. And how have we responded? Someone asked from the back. Sorvith did not answer that immediately, because the honest answer was, by convening 49 species in a room to argue for 6 hours, and that didn't feel like a sufficient reply to something that could stop time. It was at this point that Delegate Advisor Marin, the Talashi analyst who had been on duty the night the signal came in, and who had been brought in as a technical witness, raised her hand and said very quietly, "There is something in the report that I think may be relevant." Everyone looked at her. The crew manifest for Callaway's luck lists one crew member, Dick Hale, but he was not on the ship when the temporal event occurred. Silence. He had disembarked at New Cascadia Station approximately 6 hours before the ship departed on its automated return route. The port logs are clear. He was buying supplies. Specifically, she checked her notes, coffee, 3 kinds of dried protein, and a replacement calibration tool for the ship's navigation array. He was running behind schedule. The ship departed on its automated route without him. More silence. He is, she continued, currently on New Cascadia Station. He has been contacted. He is aware of the situation. He has requested permission to travel to Meridian 7 to address the session directly. He's requested permission, Sorvith repeated. The human whose ship is encased in a time bubble. Yes. And what was his tone? In the communication? Marin checked her notes again, because she wanted to be precise about this. The communication logs describe his tone as, and this is a direct transcription from the receiving officer's report, relaxed, bordering on cheerful, with what the officer described as an inappropriate level of amusement given the circumstances. 49 delegations processed that. He found it funny, said OSK, who had also been brought in as a technical witness and who was sitting next to Marin. The officer's report uses the word laughed, Marin confirmed. The chamber did not know what to do with that. The cooperative had extensive experience with crises. It had emergency protocols and response frameworks and a very thorough system of escalation that had been refined over 800 years of collective governance. What it did not have, what it had never needed before, was a protocol for a species that responded to temporal anomalies by laughing. Delegate Principal Sorvith granted the human's request. He would arrive in 72 hours. In the meantime, the 49 delegations continued to argue, and the 17 monitoring stations continued to watch Callaway's luck hang motionless in the dark of the Varith corridor, and the mug continued its 11-day fall, patient as gravity, going nowhere at all. Decker Hale had been an independent cargo contractor for 11 years, which meant he had also been, in that time, a part-time mechanic, a full-time improviser, an occasional negotiator of terms that technically weren't legal in 4 systems, and a person with a very healthy relationship with things going wrong. When things went wrong, engines, contracts, navigation arrays, relationships with port officials, Decker had a habit of getting quiet, and still in a way that people who didn't know him sometimes mistook for shock. It wasn't shock. It was the mental equivalent of taking a very deep breath before lifting something heavy. He had done this when Callaway's luck had departed New Cascadia 6 hours ahead of him. He had stood on the dock, calibration tool in one hand, coffee in the other, watching the Port Authority logs confirm what he already knew, that his ship had executed its automated departure protocol on schedule, and he had not been on it, and he had gone very still. Then he had laughed. It was not a happy laugh, exactly. It was the laugh of a man who had spent 11 years in deep space cargo work and had developed the specific, slightly unhinged sense of humor that comes from the universe repeatedly demonstrating that it does not care about your schedule. It was the laugh of someone who recognized the shape of a problem, a long shape, a complicated shape, and found, in that recognition, something that was almost funny. Almost. He had called the automated systems. The ship had confirmed its position, its heading, its operational status. Olfine, running on the pre-programmed route back to the hegemony drop point at Varith, where it would deliver 3 crates of Terra-manufactured agricultural components that Decker had been contracted to move for a Vrathi farming collective. Then, 17 hours later, New Cascadia's Port Authority had called him, and the tone of the call had been strange, too careful, too measured, the specific kind of measured that people use when they're trying not to sound scared. And Decker had listened to the summary of what the monitoring stations were showing and had gone very still again. Then he had laughed again. He recognized this one. Not the specifics. He had never had his ship get caught in a time bubble before, and he was fairly certain nobody had, and he was aware that was significant, but the shape of it, the specific cosmic absurdity of it, the fact that he had been running 6 hours late because he'd stopped to get coffee, and that coffee had kept him off his ship when time stopped around it, and that the mug that was frozen mid-fall on his forward console was the same mug he would have been drinking from if he'd made it back on time. The universe had saved his life with a cup of coffee. If that wasn't funny, Decker didn't know what was. He booked passage to Meridian 7 on the next available transport, packed a bag, and spent the 3-day journey reading every scrap of publicly available information the cooperative had released about the anomaly, which wasn't much, because they were very carefully releasing very little. He could read the panic between the lines of the official statements, the careful language, the phrases that were doing a lot of work, unprecedented phenomenon, ongoing investigation, all relevant agencies coordinating. Those were words that meant, we have no idea what this is, and we're trying very hard not to say that. He arrived at Meridian 7 with a thermos of coffee, because he had learned that cooperative station commissaries were an adventure he preferred to face already caffeinated, and with a very clear idea of what he was going to say to 49 species when he walked into that chamber. He was also, if he was being honest with himself, looking forward to it in a way he probably shouldn't have been. The port at Meridian 7 was staffed by a Keth officer who looked at Decker's credentials with the expression of someone who had been told to treat the arrival as routine and was finding that instruction very difficult. She processed his entry, confirmed his appointment with the emergency session, and then, departing from protocol in a way that suggested she couldn't help herself, said, "Are you not frightened?" Decker picked up his bag and his thermos. Of what? The officer gestured, vaguely, encompassingly, in the direction that she clearly felt contained the general concept of a ship trapped in frozen time, and the implications thereof. Decker considered the question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. "A little," he said, "but also, have you looked at the readings? The way the bubble is structured, the field geometry, my ship isn't in danger. Whatever did this could have destroyed it. It didn't. It just stopped it." He looked at her. "Whatever stopped time around my ship didn't hurt it. It just wanted us to see that it could." The officer stared at him. "That's either very reassuring or very terrifying," she said. Decker nodded. "Yeah, welcome to my morning." He smiled at her, the slightly worn, genuinely warm smile of someone who has made peace with chaos as a lifestyle, and walked through the port into Cooperative Station Meridian 7, where 49 species were waiting for him with all the collective dread of a galaxy that had just discovered it didn't know something important. He was going to enjoy this. He was also going to help them, because that was the other thing about Decker Hale. Under all the coffee and the slightly too easy laughing and the cargo contractor pragmatism, he was someone who noticed things. Quiet things. The things that sat in the gap between what everyone was saying and what was actually true. And he had noticed on the 3-day journey here, reading every careful word of every official statement, that all 49 species were asking the wrong question. They were asking, what stopped time? Nobody was asking, why did it stop time around a ship that was empty? That was the one that mattered. That was the one Decker had been thinking about since the first hour, when the laughter had faded and the stillness had settled, and he'd started actually looking at the shape of the thing. He walked through Meridian 7's long corridors, past clusters of delegates and advisors and analysts, all moving with the purposeful anxiety of people in the middle of a crisis. And he drank his coffee, and he thought about empty ships and stopped time and the question nobody was asking, and the answer that he was starting to think he already knew. The grand deliberation chamber of Meridian 7 was the kind of room that had been designed by committee, which meant it was technically impressive and practically uncomfortable in a dozen small ways that added up over the course of a 6-hour session to something close to physical misery. The acoustics were excellent in the upper tiers and unpredictable in the lower ones. The seating had been calibrated for an average of 11 different body types, and suited none of them. The lighting, a compromise between species that needed blue spectrum and those that needed warm red, had landed on a color that Decker could only describe as a Tuesday in November. He walked in carrying his thermos. The chamber was full. He had expected delegates. He had not expected quite this many of them, quite this still, quite this focused in his direction from the moment he cleared the entry threshold. It was a specific kind of attention. The kind of room gives you when it has been arguing about you for days and has finally run out of arguments. He found his assigned seat, a human standard chair that had been brought in specially, which he appreciated, and which was positioned at the center of the lower floor, facing the elevated arc of principal delegates, which he also noted, and sat down. Set his thermos on the small table beside the chair. Looked up at the arc. Delegate Principal Sorvith of the Keth was watching him. She had the patient, precise expression of someone who had survived 3 days of emergency sessions and had decided to simply endure whatever came next. "Contractor Hale," she said. "Delegate Principal Sorvith." He had done his reading. "Thank you for allowing me to attend." "You requested to attend." "Yes." A pause. "You are aware," she said, "of the full scope of what the monitoring stations have observed." "I read everything that was released publicly," Decker said. "I'm also aware that you've probably observed quite a bit more than what was released publicly, and I'm hoping you'll share it with me." Another pause. Longer this time. He got the impression that Sorvith was recalibrating something. "You wish to know more than we've told you. I think it might be relevant to what I'm about to tell you." The chamber was very quiet. 49 delegations, and their assorted advisors and the small robot that apparently lived here now were all doing that thing where they were pretending not to hold their breath. "We will share our complete observational data with you," Sorvith said, "in exchange for your complete account of events as you understand them." "That's fair." Decker opened his thermos. "Do you mind if I have some coffee while we go through this? I've been traveling for 3 days, and the commissary here is a commitment I'm not ready to make." The chamber's version of murmuring happened, a low-frequency exchange of reactions across 49 species that Decker couldn't parse individually, but could read collectively as something between disbelief and involuntary amusement. Sorvith's expression shifted in a way that might have been a smile on a different face structure. "We do not mind." They gave him the full data first. That was the deal, and Sorvith honored it without preamble. An analyst stepped forward, and the tactical display expanded to show everything the cooperative had compiled. The full field geometry of the temporal bubble, the decay patterns, the spectral readings, 17 monitoring stations' individual data sets, and 7 days' worth of theoretical models that had been generated by the cooperative's scientific advisory boards, none of which had produced consensus. Decker sat with his coffee and went through it in a silence that the chamber found difficult to read. Several delegates exchanged glances. A few leaned toward their advisors and had conversations at volumes calibrated for privacy, but not, given the acoustic variability of a lower tier, actually private. The words "he is studying it" passed between multiple delegations with varying degrees of meaning attached. He was studying it. What Decker was studying specifically was the geometry of the temporal bubble, not the existence of it, which was impossible and interesting and clearly real, but its shape. The field didn't encase Callaway's luck uniformly. It was slightly asymmetrical, slightly thicker at the bow, and the readings showed that it had not switched on all at once. There was a propagation pattern, a direction. The field had originated from a point approximately 40,000 kilometers off the ship's port side and expanded to encase the vessel within 0.4 seconds. Something had aimed at it. "Can I ask a question before I give my account?" he said. "You may," said Sorvith. "The propagation origin point, 40,000 kilometers port side. Has anyone identified what was at that location when the field was deployed?" A pause. "The region was surveyed," said a different voice, Delegate Advisor Pell, in its jar, its mobility platform having rolled forward slightly. "Nothing was detected. Before the event or after?" "Both." "What about during?" Silence. The monitoring arrays, Pell said slowly, are not configured for real-time spatial mapping during a localized temporal event. The computational load, so you don't know what was there during the zero point 0.4 seconds it took to deploy the field. More silence. No, Pell said. Decker nodded. Drank his coffee. Okay, here's what I can tell you. He set the thermos down and leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. I've been thinking about this for 3 days, and I want to walk through it in order because the order matters. 6 hours before Calloway's Luck departed New Cascadia, I disembarked to pick up supplies. That was my schedule. The ship was supposed to wait. It didn't. It ran its automated departure on the program time because I'd forgotten to update the system parameters after I rescheduled my supply run. He paused. I do this. It's a character flaw. My ship left without me because I forgot to tell it not to. Basic human error. Understood, said Sorvith. The ship ran its automated route. Standard transit path through the Verith corridor. No deviation, no incident. 17 hours of clean travel. Then, at the edge of the corridor, it got stopped. Yes. Now here's the part one want you to think about carefully. He looked up at the arc of delegates. The ship was empty. One-man freighter, and the one man wasn't on it. Whatever stopped it, whatever generated that temporal field and aimed it at Calloway's Luck, either didn't know the ship was empty or it knew and stopped it anyway. The chamber sat with that. If it didn't know, Decker continued, that tells us something about its surveillance capability. A civilization or entity advanced enough to deploy a targeted temporal suspension field missed a cargo manifest, which seems unlikely. Agreed, said Pell. So, it probably knew the ship was empty. It stopped an empty ship anyway, which means the ship isn't the message. Another silence. A different kind. The ship is the envelope, Decker said. Something is trying to send a message. And it put the message in a container it knew would get everyone's attention. A human vessel caught in an impossible field. And then it waited to see who would come to open it. Delegate Principal Sorvith was very still. And who has come? Me, said Decker. The person who wasn't on the ship. The human who should have been there and wasn't. He looked at her. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's possible. And I want to be clear that I'm speculating. I have no proof of this, that whatever deployed that field knew exactly who owned that ship. And it knew I wasn't on it. And it wants to meet me. The chamber erupted. Not loudly. It was still a room full of civilized species who had protocol for erupting, but the low-frequency exchange went from murmur to roar in about 4 seconds, and Decker sat in the middle of it and drank his coffee and waited. Sorvith brought the chamber back to order with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a very long time and had a very large gavel and was not afraid to use it. That is, she said, when the room had settled, an extraordinary claim. Yes, Decker agreed. You are proposing that an entity capable of stopping time staged an 11-day incident involving 49 cooperative species and multiple emergency sessions specifically to initiate contact with one independent cargo contractor from New Cascadia. I'm proposing it as a possibility, Decker said. But, yeah, basically, why you? That, he admitted, I don't know yet. And yet you are not frightened. He thought about it. Really thought about it, the way the port officer had made him think about it, because both of them deserved a real answer. Something that can stop time chose not to hurt my ship, he said. It froze it, preserved it. The mug is still falling. It hasn't broken, it's just stopped. Whatever this is, it's not hostile. It's trying to get a conversation started. He picked up his thermos again. I'm pretty good at conversations. Pell's jar rotated. You find this amusing. I find it interesting, Decker said. The galaxy panicked for 11 days over a frozen cup of coffee. Meanwhile, I think someone just really wants to talk. To you, apparently. Pell rotated again. You are either extraordinarily perceptive or extraordinarily foolish. Decker smiled. In my experience, those are usually the same thing. They gave him a room on the station. Nice room, by cooperative standards, human atmosphere, correct gravity, a bed that wasn't designed for a species with 4 limbs arranged differently from his. He sat on the edge of it and thought for a long time. He had said he was speculating. That was true. He had no proof, only the shape of things, the geometry of the situation read the way you read cargo manifests and transit logs, and the gap between what a contract said and what it meant. 11 years of reading those gaps had given him a particular instinct for when something was communicating obliquely. When a shipper was telling you one thing with their paperwork and another thing with their loading schedule. When a port official's politeness was a form of pressure. When silence was a sentence. The temporal field was a sentence. He just needed to understand the language. He pulled out his personal comm and looked at everything he had on Callaway's luck. The ship's logs from the 47 days before the incident. Transit records. Cargo history. Every port of call. He went through it methodically, the way he always did when something didn't add up. Not looking for a specific thing, just looking, letting the pattern build. 2 hours in, he found something. 3 months ago, Callaway's luck had made an unscheduled stop. He hadn't logged it officially. A minor detour, a course deviation that had been logged as a navigational correction, but was actually, if you looked at the stellar coordinates, a deliberate pause near the outer edge of the Varith corridor's deepest section. He had stopped because his sensors had picked up something, a reading he hadn't been able to identify. Faint, intermittent, not matching any signal type in his library. He had sat on the edge of it for about 2 hours trying to figure out what it was, and then the signal had stopped, and he had continued on his route and filed it as a sensor ghost and largely forgotten about it. He had forgotten about it. He had forgotten about it. And then 3 months later, something at the edge of the Varith corridor had stopped his ship in time and waited for him to come find out why. Decker sat with that for a long time. Then he opened a comm channel to delegate Principal Sorvith's office and requested an urgent meeting. The duty officer who answered sounded tired. It was late by station time. The delegate principal is not available until morning session. Contractor Hale. I know, he said. I am sorry, but I think I need to show her something tonight. A pause. The duty officer clearly weighing the probability that this was urgent against the probability that this was a human being dramatic. 1 moment. He held. Sorvith's voice came on the line 3 minutes later, fully present, not remotely sleepy. Either Keth didn't sleep the way humans did, or she had been awake. Kontarak Hade. Delegate principal. I found something in my ship's logs. 3 months ago. I think he paused organizing it. I think this didn't start 11 days ago. I think I was contacted 3 months ago, and I didn't recognize it. Silence on the line. Long and specific, and the kind that contained a lot of thinking. Come to my office, Sorvith said. He went. Outside Meridian 7's transparent observation panels, the stars hung in their familiar indifferent patterns, and somewhere in the dark of the Varith corridor, Callaway's luck waited with its frozen lights, and its patient falling mug. Time stopped around it like a held breath. The galaxy had been panicking for 11 days. Decker was starting to understand that the panic was pointing exactly backward. The right feeling wasn't fear. The right feeling was something much harder to name, something that sat between wonder and responsibility and the very particular sensation of being chosen for something you hadn't applied for and couldn't have predicted and weren't entirely sure you were qualified for. He walked through Meridian 7's quiet corridors towards Sorvith's office. Behind him, the small robot that attended all sessions rolled out from an alcove where it had apparently been parked and followed him at a distance of approximately 12 meters. Decker didn't notice it. The robot had been waiting for him specifically for 20 years. That would become relevant later. Sorvith's office was smaller than Decker had expected, which was either a statement about her personal preferences or the cooperative's approach to allocating resources to its most burdened people, and he suspected both. It had one large observation window looking out into the dark, a desk that held a controlled chaos of data tablets in 3 different formats, and 2 chairs, one clearly hers built for Keth anatomy, and one that was very clearly a human standard chair that had been brought in within the last few hours because there was still a small tag on the back leg for whatever storage room it had come from. She had been expecting him before he called. He noticed the chair. He sat down in it and decided not to mention it yet. Show me the log, she said. He opened his personal comm and transferred the file to her desk display. The stellar coordinates populated across her screen. The deviation from his standard route, the timestamp, the duration of the stop, and the sensor readings he had filed as a ghost anomaly, and buried in a footnote of a transit log that nobody, including him, had looked at since. Sorvith studied it. She had the reading posture of someone who processed spatial data comfortably. Four arms that moved in small, precise adjustments as she worked through the information, one of them occasionally touching the screen to rotate a data cluster. 3 months ago, she said, February of this cycle, I was running a cargo drop to the hegemony outpost on the far side of the corridor. Standard route. I made the detour without fully processing why. I filed it as a navigational correction, but looking at the coordinates now, I didn't drift off course. I chose that position. I held it for 2 hours and 17 minutes. She looked up at him. You chose it. I think something guided me there, and I didn't recognize that it was happening. The signal you recorded, filed as a sensor ghost. I've been going over it for the last 2 hours. It's not a ghost. He leaned forward. It's structured, repetitive in a non-random way. The intervals between pulses follow a pattern that I couldn't identify at the time because I wasn't looking for a pattern. I was looking for a known signal type. When I couldn't match it to anything in my library, I wrote it off. Sorvith was quiet for a moment. You were saying that 3 months ago, something in the deepest section of the Varith corridor produced a structured signal that guided your ship to a specific location, held you there for over 2 hours, and you left without recognizing what was happening. Yes. And 3 months later, the same region of the corridor produced a temporal suspension field that stopped your ship on the same route. Same region. Close enough. She was quiet again. Longer this time. You believe this was a first contact attempt. 3 months ago. I believe 3 months ago something tried to get my attention, and I was too focused on my cargo schedule to notice. He sat back in a chair, and I believe whatever it was decided to try a different approach. Stopping time. It's hard to ignore. Sorvith set down the data tablet she had been holding and looked at him directly. The specific direct look that felt across species barriers, like a person deciding whether to say the thing they were actually thinking. Kontrakale. In 12 years of serving as delegate principal, I have sat in the grand deliberation chamber during 46 crisis sessions. 3 species contact events. 2 territorial conflicts that nearly became wars. 1 incident that still does not have an official classification. She paused. In all of those sessions, I have watched the cooperative's delegates do what they did in the last 3 days. Generate theories, model scenarios, argue about protocols, and produce eventually a consensus position that everyone could tolerate even if no one fully believed it. It is how we function. It is genuinely how we have managed to survive together for 800 years. I can see that, Decker said. But in all of those sessions, she continued, not once has the answer walked in the front door, carrying a beverage container, and told us we were asking the wrong question. He looked at her. You're the answer, she said. You understood this before you arrived. You came here not because we summoned you. You came because you knew something that we didn't, and you were deciding how to tell us. She tilted her head slightly. I would like to know what else you haven't told us yet. There it was. The quality that made her who she was, the patience to wait for the real thing, and the precision to name it when it arrived. The signal pattern, he said. I ran it against every communication database I had access to on the transport here. No matches. So I did something different. I ran it against mathematical sequences. And it matched. He looked at her. It's prime numbers. But not the way you'd expect. It's not a simple sequence. It's a layered pattern. Primes nested inside primes. Each layer encoding spatial coordinates. The outermost layer gives you the location in the corridor. The next layer gives you depth, distance below the standard transit plane. The innermost layer. He paused. The innermost layer, Sorvith said. Gives a time, he said. A specific time. Converted to standard cooperative dating. It's 11 days from now. Silence. The kind that had weight. 11 days from now, she said. From the time I decoded it. So 14 days from when the temporal field was deployed. And the location? The same coordinates where my ship was stopped. He met her eyes. Whatever is out there has been trying to arrange a meeting. 3 months ago, it tried a soft approach, guided my ship, generated signal. I missed it, so it escalated, made something impossible happen in a very public place. Got everyone's attention. Got mine. He set his comm on her desk, and it left a calendar invitation in the signal. Sorvith looked at the comm at the coordinates on her display, at the human sitting across from her in a chair that had been pulled from storage before he had called. "You are proposing," she said, "that we travel to the location where your ship is frozen and be present in 14 days. I'm proposing that I travel there," Decker said. "I think the invitation was for me. You said we." He looked at her steadily. "I said we because I don't think you should let me go alone, and I don't think you would. And because I think, whatever this is, it matters more than me. It matters for everyone. If something is reaching out to humanity for the first time through me, the cooperative needs to be there, not to manage it or control it or run it through 17 protocols." He stopped, just to witness it, so that it counts. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the station's ambient sound, the low hum of life support, the distant movement of a night shift crew, became noticeable in the silence. "You are asking me," she said at last, "to authorize a mission to a temporal anomaly site based on a signal decoded from a 3-month-old sensor log, predicated on a theory advanced by an independent cargo contractor with no scientific credentials, to attend a meeting with an unknown entity that stopped time to get your attention." "Yes," he said, "in 14 days. Yes." She looked at him for another moment. Then she reached across her desk and pulled a blank authorization form from a stack of data tablets, and Decker recognized the format even across the species barrier, the kind of form that requires a senior signature and generates a paper trail and commits resources, and she began filling it in. "The cooperative will send a science vessel," she said, writing. "Small crew. Myself, Delegate Advisor Pell, 3 scientific observers, you, and whatever support staff the safety protocols require. We will be present as witnesses. We will not interfere unless you ask us to, or unless," she glanced up, "something threatens the mission's integrity. That's more than fair. It is also," she said, signing the form, "either the most important thing I have ever authorized or the most embarrassing. I have not determined which yet." Decker smiled. "Story of my whole career." The 14 days had their own specific texture, the kind of waiting that isn't passive, that is its own form of work. The cooperative's reaction to the authorized mission was complicated. The emergency session convened again. There were formal objections from 3 delegations who felt that any engagement with the entity should go through established first contact protocols, which were a document 340 pages long that had been written during a period when the cooperative had believed first contact would involve a species roughly equivalent to themselves in observable technological development, and which did not have a section covering temporal suspension fields or multi-layered prime-encoded calendar invitations. The Vrathi hegemony lodged a formal protest about the use of a human contractor as a primary point of contact, citing concerns about Terran unilateralism, which was ironic given that the invitation had not been addressed to the hegemony. The Sen Collective voted to abstain from involvement entirely and then immediately requested observer status, which Sorvith granted without comment. Decker spent the 14 days doing 3 things. He studied the signal, every layer of it, running the decoded coordinates through every geological and cartographic database he could access, trying to build a picture of what was at the meeting point. He found very little. The region of the Varith corridor, indicated by the innermost coordinates, was poorly mapped. A survey vessel had passed through the outer edge of it 60 years ago and recorded unremarkable deep space, minimal debris field, no navigational hazards. Nothing since. He also went over his entire cargo history. Every route, every port, every stop, looking for other gaps, other moments when something might have tried to reach him, and he'd been too distracted by invoices to notice. He found 2. 18 months ago, a sensor reading he'd filed as equipment drift that, looked at now, had the same structural characteristics as the corridor signal. And, for years ago, a communication fragment he had assumed was background noise from a nearby relay station that decoded using the same prime sequence method, produced a single word in standard cooperative script. Hail! Asterisk, someone had been trying to contact him for 4 years, using increasingly dramatic methods. And he had been, across all 4 of those years, very focused on his cargo manifests. The third thing he did was write a message to his sister on New Cascadia. She was a teacher, 37 years old, 2 kids, had never left the station in her life, and considered this a perfectly reasonable life choice. He and she had not spoken in several months, which was the way it always went. Not estrangement, just the drift of 2 people whose lives ran on incompatible schedules. He wrote her a long message, told her approximately everything, asked her to not worry, which he knew was pointless, told her he would contact her after. He sent it, and then stared at the sent confirmation for a while. Then he packed a bag, coffee, 2 changes of clothes, the calibration tool he bought at New Cascadia that he still hadn't installed because his ship was frozen in time, and boarded the science vessel that Sorvith had arranged. Calloway's luck asterisk was more affecting in person than in the monitoring data. Decker had seen the readings for 14 days. He thought he had processed what the ship looked like, what it meant, the visual reality of a vessel frozen in the amber of stop time. He hadn't, because readings were abstract, and Calloway's luck in front of him, seen through the science vessel's forward viewport, was not abstract at all. It was his ship. The scuff on the cargo bay door from the dock collision in Hegemony Port 3. The aftermarket navigation array he'd installed himself, slightly crooked because he'd done it at an angle and never bothered to straighten it. The running lights, mid-blink, in the pattern he'd set himself, a slightly irregular rhythm he'd customized because the default was boring. Everything specific, everything his, all of it caught in a moment that had been going on for 25 days now while the universe moved around it. And the mug, visible through the viewport, 47 degrees. Patient. That's a very good mug, he said. Excuse me, said the mission's chief science officer, a Keth named Orvith who had the expression of someone permanently braced for information that was going to require updating her models. The mug, Decker said. The one in the viewport. It's a good mug. I've had it for 7 years. Survived 17 drops, 1 minor explosive decompression event, and a dock worker with very bad aim. He looked at it. It will be unfortunate if it broke. The temporal field, said Orvith, appears to be maintaining the object in stasis, not merely freezing its motion. If the field releases, the mug should complete its trajectory without. She stopped, apparently recognizing she was reassuring a human about his cup while parked next to an impossible physics phenomenon. The mug should be fine. Good, said Decker. He went to his seat. The science vessel held position at a respectful distance from the temporal field's edge, exactly where the primary coordinates indicated. The innermost layer of the signal had given a time. 3 hours from now, converted to standard. We wait, said Sorvith, who was standing at the observation rail with the particular stillness of someone who has committed fully to a course of action and is now experiencing the specific calm that follows commitment. They waited. 2 hours and 58 minutes later, the space 40,000 kilometers off the science vessel's port side lit up. Not explosively, not dramatically, in the way science fiction had always promised this sort of thing would happen. It was quiet. A section of space that had been empty developed a quality of being occupied, as though something very large had been there all along and had simply decided, now, to be visible. It had no shape that Decker's eyes could resolve into anything his vocabulary could name. It was vast. It was present. And it produced on every communication frequency simultaneously a signal. The same signal he had first encountered 3 months ago in his sensor logs. The layered prime sequence, translated now not into coordinates and times, but into language, cooperative standard, with a slight formal quality that suggested it had been learned from transmitted data rather than spoken conversation. Hale, you took a long time. Asterisk Decker leaned toward the comm. In my defense, he said, I didn't get the first message. A pause. Then, we know. We adjusted. Asterisk the temporal field. Yes, we needed the cooperative to bring you here. You are very difficult to reach when you're focused on your manifests. Astor Sorvith made a sound beside him. It was very small. He thought it was laughter. I've heard that before, Decker said. Can I ask who what you are? The response came as text to the screen, but Decker had the impression it was also something else, that the communication was arriving on a layer he didn't have the equipment to receive fully, and that what he was reading was a simplified translation of something much more complex. We have been at the edge of this region for longer than your species has been able to cross the distance between stars. We have watched many civilizations grow. We have not spoken to most of them. We are speaking to you. Asterisk, why us? Why humanity? Another pause. Longer. Because you laugh at things that frighten you. Asterisk Decker sat with that. We have studied this galaxy for a very long time, Hill. We have observed civilizations advance. Grow capable. Grow afraid. Power and fear grow together. This is the pattern. Every civilization, when it reaches a certain point, begins to protect what it has rather than discover what it might become. The fear becomes the dominant frequency. Asterisk, your species frightens us. Asterisk, is that good or bad? Decker asked. It is interesting. You are afraid. We see it clearly. And you laugh anyway. You make problems into jokes, and the jokes carry you past the things that would stop other species entirely. We do not understand this. We would like to. Asterisk, the entity paused again. The ship. The frozen ship. We chose a human vessel because we needed you to send a human. The cooperative would have sent delegates with protocols. Humanity sent the one who was supposed to be on the ship and wasn't. Asterisk, because I was late buying coffee. Yes, you were late because you wanted something that made the work comfortable. A small thing. A human thing. This is what we wanted to understand. You are capable of great seriousness and great power, and you stop for coffee. Asterisk Decker looked at his thermos. I think, he said slowly, that's a pretty good summary of us, actually. We would like to speak further. Over time, we are patient. You have seen this. Asterisk, the temporal field around Calloway's luck dissolved. Clean, complete, immediate. The ship's running lights resumed mid-blink. The mug, and Decker watched the viewport with something that was probably inappropriate given the magnitude of the moment. The mug completed its fall, hit the console edge, bounced once, and settled. Intact. The entity's signal modulated. If it had a register equivalent to warmth, it was in the signal now. Your mug did not break. Asterisk, no, Decker said. It's a good mug. Yes. Asterisk, then. Asterisk, we will speak again, Hale. When you're not focused on your manifests. Asterisk, the quality of being occupied left the space. Gone with the same quiet with which it had arrived. The stars were just stars again. Calloway's luck drifted in real time for the first time in 25 days, lights blinking, intact, waiting for its owner. The science vessel was very quiet. Sorvith said, eventually, that was not in any protocol document. No, Decker agreed. The cooperative will want a full debrief. Multiple sessions. The scientific implications alone, I know. She was quiet for a moment. They said they would speak again. Yes. To you. To humanity. Through me, for now. He looked at her. We should probably figure out what we want to say. Sorvith looked out the viewport at Calloway's luck, real and present and whole in the dark. Yes, she said. I suppose we should. Decker reached for his thermos. It was empty. Had been for an hour. He would need to find a commissary. The debrief took 9 days. Decker had been in debriefs before. After the minor explosive decompression event, after a customs dispute in Vrathi space that had involved a misunderstanding about what qualified as a restricted cargo, and once after he had accidentally delivered a shipment to the wrong station on the wrong side of a territorial boundary, and spent 4 hours explaining to 2 different sets of officials why this did not constitute espionage. He understood the shape of debriefs. The same questions from different angles. The careful note-taking. The long pauses that meant someone was writing something down that they weren't going to share with you. A 9-day debrief conducted by 49 species simultaneously was not qualitatively different. It was just much, much larger. He sat in the grand deliberation chamber, in his human standard chair that now had a small placard attached to it, which he chose not to examine too closely, and Answer questions for 9 days. The questions came in waves and themes. The first wave was technical. What exactly had the entity said? What frequency had the signal operated on? Could he reproduce the prime sequence encoding? Had he observed any physical properties of the entity's visible form? The second wave was strategic. What did the entity want? What had it meant by speaking further? What timeline was implied? Who would represent humanity in ongoing contact? The third wave was, if he was honest, existential. What did it mean that an ancient entity had been watching the galaxy for longer than most species had existed, had chosen not to contact the majority of civilizations, and had specifically selected humanity because humans laughed at frightening things? That third wave was the one that took the longest, because nobody in the chamber had a clean answer for it, including Decker, and the cooperative had spent 800 years operating on the assumption that if you gathered enough intelligent species in a room, they could produce a clean answer for anything. I want to be precise about what they said. Decker told the chamber on the 6th day when the question came around for the 4th time. They didn't say humanity was special in the sense of being superior or uniquely valuable on some cosmic scale. They said we were interesting. Specifically, they said we were difficult to understand. They've watched a lot of civilizations advance, and the pattern they observe every time is that capability and fear grow together. The more powerful a civilization becomes, the more it has to protect. And the more it has to protect, the more it fears losing it. And eventually the fear becomes the dominant thing. The thing that shapes decisions. The thing that stops progress and calls it wisdom. The chamber was quiet. They look at humanity and they see a species that is afraid. He continued. We are. Anyone who tells you humanity isn't afraid is either very young or not paying attention. We're afraid of dying, of being forgotten, of not maturing, of maturing too much. We carry a tremendous amount of fear on a daily basis. He paused, and we also tell jokes about it. We make fun of the thing that scares us. We write songs about grief, and we sing them at parties. We name our ships things like Callaway's Luck when luck has very little to do with how cargo shipping works. We laugh when we're supposed to be serious, and we're serious when everyone expects us to laugh, and we make absolutely no sense, and apparently, to something that has watched this galaxy for longer than recorded history. That's fascinating. Delegate Advisor Pell's jar had been angled toward him throughout this exchange, which he had learned was Pell's equivalent of focused attention. You are describing irrationality as an asset. I'm describing it as a survival mechanism, Decker said. Fear in a pure form is paralysis. It calcifies every other civilization out there. No offense. Eventually hits a point where the fear of losing what they have outweighs the pull of what they might discover. And they stop. Not dramatically, just gradually. They get very good at maintaining what exists and very cautious about changing it. They call it stability, and it is stability. It's just also a kind of stopping. And humanity does not stop, said Sorvith. Humanity stops constantly, Decker said. We just also start again. And we make fun of ourselves for stopping while we're doing it, which, I think, is the part the entity finds genuinely confusing. We don't take our failures with the dignity of a species that has its act together. We fall off the dock in the harbor, and then we tell everyone about it. He paused. We are a species that ships our own biographies along with everything else we export. Pell rotated. You were saying the cooperatives? Fear is different from human fear. I'm saying the cooperative civilizations have had much longer to let fear settle into something institutional. He chose his words carefully. You've had 800 years of collective governance to develop protocols that are partly about efficiency and partly about never again doing the things that nearly broke you. And those protocols are good. They've kept 49 species from killing each other, which is honestly extraordinary. I mean that. He looked at Sorvith. But the entity isn't wrong that there's a rigidity, a preferred shape of behavior, something that might, from outside, look like fear wearing very good clothing. The chamber was very quiet. The entity contacted humanity, said one of the Sen delegates, but was also communicating with the cooperative by choosing to use a human vessel in cooperative space. We were part of the message. Yes, Decker said. I think we all were. On the 8th day, something happened that Decker had not planned for. The small robot, the one that attended all sessions, that had followed him through Meridian 7's corridors on the night he had gone to Sorvith's office, that had been present in the chamber without anyone being able to explain why, broadcast a signal. It was brief, 23 seconds. It went out on a frequency that matched precisely the frequency the entity had used in the Varith corridor. The chamber went from debate to complete stillness in about 3 seconds. The robot broadcast its signal, and then it rolled forward to the center of the lower floor and stopped, and waited. Nobody moved. Decker looked at it, really looked at it for the first time. He had registered it as background, the way you register furniture. Now he saw it clearly. Small, functional-looking, built in no particular tradition he recognized, with sensor nodes positioned in an arrangement that didn't match any cooperative standard design. It had no identifying markings. It had been attending sessions for 20 years, and nobody had identified its origin. He realized in the specific way that felt like a key turning in a lock that he knew exactly what this was. It's a probe, he said, quietly, to himself, but in the chamber's acoustics it carried. Everyone looked at him. It's a probe, he said again for the room. They sent it 20 years ago. Before they tried the signal, before the corridor, before any of this, they sent this thing to watch. To learn the language, learn the protocols, learn how the cooperative works. 20 years of sessions, 20 years of watching how 49 species deliberate and decide and argue. He looked at the robot. That's a lot of patience. It has been here, Sorvith said, with the expression of someone recalculating 20 years of meetings for 20 years. Learning us, Decker said, so that when the time came for contact, they'd be able to speak our language. All of our languages. He stepped forward, moving toward the robot. No one stopped him, possibly because no one was sure what the protocol was for approaching a probable ancient entity probe during a debrief, and the protocol document definitely did not cover this. You've been watching for a long time, he said to it. The robot broadcast a short signal. 3 seconds. The prime sequence structure compressed. Decker's comm translated it. He had loaded the decoding algorithm before the debrief started, a preparation that had gotten him a long look from the security officer who had screened him, but which was now paying off, and the translation read, longer than 20 years. The probe was our 3rd attempt. You ignored the first 2. Asterisk, he looked at the robot. What were the first 2? The robot broadcast again. The lights on the outer edge of New Cascadia Station that have been in an irregular pattern for 40 years. And the strange current in the deep section of the Varith corridor that navigation charts list as a gravitational anomaly. Asterisk Decker stood very still. New Cascadia had navigation warnings about the outer edge lights. Everyone knew about them. They'd been listed as a power relay fault for as long as he could remember. You learned to ignore them when you were docking. He had been ignoring them his entire adult life. 40 years, he said. Yes. Asterisk. You have been trying to say hello to this part of the galaxy for 40 years. Yes. Asterisk. And we thought it was a broken light fixture. The robot paused. The pause had a quality. If a 20-year-old probe had a sense of humor, the pause contained it. Yes. Asterisk Decker looked back at the chamber. At Sorvith, whose 4 arms had gone very still. At Pell, whose jar was angled at a new angle entirely. At 49 delegations who had just learned that the greatest first contact event in galactic history had been parked outside New Cascadia Station for 40 years, and everyone had filed the paperwork for a maintenance ticket. He felt the laughter building. He knew it was wrong, in the sense of being categorically inappropriate for the gravity of the moment. He laughed anyway. It started small and became genuine, and once it started, he couldn't and didn't try to stop it because the shape of the thing was just exactly perfect. 40 years of broken light, a navigation anomaly, a sensor ghost, a mug falling for 25 days, and a galaxy that panicked while the answer sat patiently in a corner of the grand deliberation chamber attending sessions. He laughed the way you laugh when you find your keys in the pocket you already checked twice, multiplied by the scale of 49 civilizations. The chamber watched him. Then, Sorvith made a sound. It was very small, but it was there. Then, Pell's jar rotated in a way that Decker was becoming able to read, and he was fairly certain it was laughing too. Then, one by one, in whatever forms their respective biologies permitted, sounds and movements and postures that each species' evolutionary history had arrived at for the same internal response. The Grand Deliberation Chamber, Meridian 7, began to laugh. The robot broadcast a short signal. The translation read, This is why we chose you. Asterisk the ninth day was the last day of the formal debrief, and it ended not with a resolution or a voted protocol or an official position document, but with Sorvith closing her notes, looking out over the chamber, and saying, We have more questions than we started with. That is, I believe, appropriate. Decker was given custody of Calloway's Luck, which was towed to Meridian 7's docking bay and thoroughly examined by 6 scientific teams before being released to him. The examination found nothing that hadn't been there before the temporal field. The ship was structurally identical to its last inspection. The navigation array was still slightly crooked. The mug was on the console floor where it had landed. He picked it up, set it back on the console ledge where it belonged. He did not file a formal report about the mug. He felt that was between him and the mug. Sorvith came to the docking bay as he was running pre-departure checks. She stood at the bay entrance, which was the diplomatic equivalent of a visit. She was not on the ship, not in a space, but present. He noticed it. You are returning to New Cascadia? She asked. Eventually. I have a cargo drop at the hegemony outpost that's about a month overdue. The client has been very understanding, given the circumstances, but there are limits. The entity, the probe, will be in the session chamber tomorrow, I guess. And the day after. It's been going for 20 years. I don't think it has plans. He looked at her. Talk to it. Ask questions. It came here to learn you. It might as well learn that you're curious, too. Sorvith was quiet for a moment. The entity said they would speak again. To you. To humanity. I'll be the point of contact for a while, I think, just because of the existing relationship. But this isn't a human thing. It's a everyone thing. He met her eyes. They've been watching all of you too, Sorvith. For a very long time. They're not uninterested in the cooperative. They're interested in everything. They just led with humanity because we're confusing. You are confusing, she agreed. Thank you. The ghost of the smile again, this time slightly clearer. Decker was starting to alert her face. The authorized mission report, she said, will be classified level 1, available to all 49 delegations, with a summary released to public channels. Your name will be in it. That's going to be weird for me. Yes, she said. I expect so. She looked at Calloway's Luck, at its slightly crooked navigation array, and its scuffed cargo bay door. It is a good ship. Best I've ever had, Decker said. Only one, but still. He watched her leave with the specific walk of a person who had processed something enormous, and was now carrying it with the care it required. He felt, watching her, the weight of what the next years were going to look like, not for him specifically, but for all of it. The cooperative and humanity and the entity in the Varith corridor and the probe in the session chamber and 40 years of ignored light fixtures and the long, complicated, unpredictable work of actually getting to know something vast and patient that had been trying to say hello since before Decker was born. He thought about his sister, the message he'd sent. He would call her when he was clear of the station, a real call, not a text, because she deserved to hear his voice. He thought about the entity's words. You laugh at things that frighten you. He had been thinking about that for days, turning it over the way you turn a stone to look at what lives underneath. It was accurate. He could not deny that it was accurate. He had laughed at a frozen ship. He had laughed at 40 years of mistaken light fixtures. He would probably, eventually, laugh at the part where he had been bought extra time to live by stopping for coffee. But he also knew, and this was the part that was harder to explain, the part that the entity was still working to understand, that the laughter was not the opposite of taking something seriously. It was how you stayed capable of taking it seriously at all. You made it survivable, and then you survived it, and then you did the work. He ran the last of his pre-departure checks. The ship's systems came up clean. Everything nominal. Time, and he appreciated the irony, running normally. He filed his departure paperwork, which was delayed 14 minutes because the Meridian 7 docking authority required 3 additional forms for vessels that had been part of a classified incident, which he filled out methodically, which was very normal, and which was one of the things he loved about his work, that it contained, even at the edge of the incomprehensible, the reassuring texture of paperwork, and pre-flight checks, and a mug back on its console where it belonged. Calloway's luck asterisk cleared the docking bay, turned toward the corridor exit, and moved. Out in the Varith corridor, the stars were just stars. No frozen lights, no visible probe, no quality of being occupied. Just the dark and the quiet and the long distances between things which are navigable and had been navigable for long enough that he knew the route without checking. Somewhere in the deep section of the corridor, something old and patient and genuinely puzzled by humanity held its attention in the way a being holds its attention when it is satisfied with how a conversation has begun and is already thinking about where it goes next. Decker set his course for the hegemony outpost, put his thermos in the cup holder. The thermos that he had filled at Meridian 7's commissary on the way to the docking bay, because he had finally made peace with the commissary, or at least with its coffee, which was passable if you added enough of the powdered stuff he kept in his third drawer. The ship moved through the dark. The mug sat on the console where it belonged and did not fall. Outside New Cascadia Station, the lights on the outer edge blinked in their long familiar irregular pattern, and the maintenance department's open ticket for the power relay fault. First filed 40 years ago, last updated 3 weeks ago, with the note persistent fault. No resolution found. Sat in a queue with 847 other open items, waiting for someone to get to it. Nobody would get to it. It was not a fault. It never had been.